As you all know, it's Sunshine Week today, and we know that Michigan ranks dead last for integrity and dealing with conflict of interest here in the state legislature. Democrats support the bipartisan Freedom of Information Act reforms that are expected to be voted on later this week. We do think it's important that that legislation pass, and we ask that the Senate take that legislation on immediately once we're done with it. But we know that that was just a small, very small incremental step of the things that we have to do to make sure that Michigan government is more transparent to the people. We want Michigan to be a leader on these issues. We want them to be seen as an area and a government that believes in transparency and accountability. And that's why together House and Senate Democrats are coming together during this Sunshine Week to talk about this new package of bills. Under our plan, state elected officials will be required to disclose their personal finances. 47 states have financial disclosure requirements for state legislators, and we're one of those 3 states that do not. Those 3 states are Michigan, Idaho, and Vermont. Under our proposal, also, the presidential candidate, regardless of party, must release their most recent tax returns in order to appear on the Michigan ballot. Citizens deserve to know what the financial interest and the conflict of interest for people seeking office here in the state of Michigan. The people deserve elected officials who represent them and not conflicts of interest, not special interests. When politicians vote financially to benefit themselves, it betrays the public trust and invites corruption. The Democratic plan will crack down on conflicts of interest, require people to show where they have those financial interests, and make sure that those who are running for president disclose their personal tax returns. I'm pleased to be joined by a number of my colleagues who will talk about the specifics of these bills. And our first speaker is somebody who's been working on this issue and multiple issues like this for a number of years, Senator Steve Bechtold. Senator.
Thank you, Sam. Thank you, everybody, for your interest in this very important issue. Last presidential election, we had an unprecedented case of a major party candidate steadfastly refusing to release his tax returns. That meant that the American people were deprived of very important information about that person's personal finances and potential conflicts of interest. We cannot let this precedent stand. That's why I've introduced, and my colleagues in the House have introduced the same bill, to require presidential candidates and their running mates to release their income tax forms for the last 5 years prior to the election. If they fail to do so, they won't be allowed to be on Michigan's ballot. It's pure and simple. The American people, the people of Michigan, have a right to know this material. As some of you know, you maybe have a little historical bent. This has been a tradition spanning back over 40 years. The last president to refuse to release his tax returns was Richard Nixon, in which he famously uttered after releasing those tax returns that he was not a crook. I'd like to think that people that run for office are looking at the highest standards of the land, and that's why I've introduced this legislation in the Senate side, and my House colleagues picked it up on the House side as well. I think it's a very important thing to do. It actually has some Michigan tradition behind it too, because George Romney, who's from Michigan, was one of the first people running for president to release this information, and I think it's very important for transparency in this day and age of so much public cynicism that people have this information. I'd like to introduce my good colleague, Representative LeGrand, that's going to address another part of this, because you might want to ask, well, why don't we do the same thing? Well, accompanying bills in both the House and Senate would require basically the same thing. Actually goes a little bit further in releasing complete financial disclosure for elected officials in Michigan. And with that, I'd like to introduce my good friend, Representative LeGrand.
Thanks, Senator. Thank you all for being here. And as Leader Singh already pointed out, Michigan is really on the bottom of the barrel as far as ethics and accountability in the legislature, and I think that's something that should change. I personally have a number of business interests, and I think it's absolutely incumbent on me to let my voters know what those interests are, because we should be about the people's business and not about our own business when we're in this House. And so critical for our voters to be able to engage thoughtfully and understand what's going on with our potential conflicts is that we say where our interests are. And so my bill, and frankly, it's a companion bill to Senator Beta's bill. He's been working on this a lot longer than I have, and he deserves a lot of credit for bringing this issue up again and again. But my bill proposes that folks in this legislature, but also the governor, the lieutenant governor, the secretary of state, and U of M regents and judges and board of trustee members and board of governor members all disclose what their finances are, because we can't know when people are dealing in their own interests if we don't know where their interests are. So I'm excited by this bill, and I'm excited by the prospect of having some accountability, not just for, I don't think anybody in this room is going to be running for president in 2020, but we're all here, and we all, our voters all deserve to hear where our interests lie, and have us recuse ourselves when it's appropriate. I actually recused myself twice in the last legislative session, and for what it's worth, those weren't missed votes. So any of you here in the media, don't report those next time as missed votes. I didn't miss votes, I had conflicts, and so I stepped back. But if we don't know where folks' conflicts are, we can't enforce and hold our legislators accountable. And now my colleague, Vanessa, well, I was trying to say legislator or Representative Guerra, who also has a companion piece, wants to speak.
Thank you. Thank you, Representative LeGrand. My name is Vanessa Guerra, and I serve as the state representative for Michigan's 95th District, and I'm proud to be introducing the Presidential Tax Return Disclosure Bill in the House. Voters want accountability, as I'm sure has been mentioned before. They want people that they send to office to truly represent them and not abuse that trust for their own personal gain. One critical way to do that is with legislation I'm introducing that would require the presidential candidate to release their most recent tax returns in order to appear on the Michigan ballot. Citizens deserve to know what candidates are up to and who they're really representing. We couldn't ask for a better example in the last election of why we should be concerned about financial interests and conflict of interest than in President Donald Trump. This isn't an esoteric concern. This isn't legislation that's an answer in search of a problem. In 2016, we had the real-life example of a major party presidential candidate who refused to disclose their tax returns. Reporters, nonpartisan government transparency advocates, and citizens asked Donald Trump again and again to be straight with the American people about his vast financial holdings and conflicts of interest and just release his tax returns. That's what every presidential candidate has done in the modern era. They did this to show their respect for the American people that they are going to serve. They knew that the American people deserved to know if the person they were sending to the most powerful and important office in the land was there to truly represent their interests to the best of his or her ability. But Donald Trump steadfastly refused to release his tax returns. He refused to provide the American people with critical information. This cannot be allowed to stand. That's information we all deserve to know. And now he is the president, and there's mounting evidence that he may still be acting in his own financial interest. With his Washington, D.C. hotel and business projects all around the world, we still have many questions. Questions remain surrounding the extent of his holdings and international dealings, particularly with the Russians. And there are many unanswered questions that we have yet to receive any answers from. This is a textbook example of why combating conflicts of interest with transparency to the American people is so important. It doesn't matter if you voted for Donald Trump or if you voted for someone else. All major presidential candidates from both parties have disclosed their tax returns to the American people since President Eisenhower. This is not a partisan effort. It's the right thing to do, and it's something that everyone should support. And now I'd like to thank Representative LeGrand for having me and pass it over.
Great. Thank you. And so that's what we're here for today. And so we are pleased to talk about personal financial disclosure within the legislature, within state offices, as well as for the President of the United States. We want to see a government that's open and accountable. The people have said that time and time again. And so we're pleased to be here today. On a final note, as I mentioned as I started off, we are pleased to be working on that bipartisan package of bills that are dealing with the Freedom of Information Act and putting the legislature and others under that Freedom of Information Act. And I'm just asking that the Senate take these bills up. As you know, we had them passed last year. The Senate Republicans stopped that process from moving forward, and it's time for them to act in good faith. This is something that the people want, and we want to make sure that that open transparency is given to them.